our guest is Tracy Groot.
That's the message I'm hearing for America for today is wake up and pray.
Live your faith and pass it on. Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today our guest is Tracy Groot. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you, Jeanne.
Now, Tracy wrote a novel called Maggie Bright. Now, Maggie Bright is the name of a boat. And this takes place in World War II at the time of the evacuation of Dunkirk.
Right.
That is often called the miracle of Dunkirk. Why is that?
That's a great question. The reason why is because the King of England called his entire nation together for prayer for this purpose. And it is unprecedented in England's history that a monarch called his people together for prayer on behalf of the British Army. So that's why it is called the miracle of Dunkirk. The miracle showed up in that in 9 days, both the civilians and the Navy came to the rescue of the British Army, and it was called the greatest military rescue in history.
Because what happened is they suddenly were surrounded by the Germans and had nowhere to go.
Exactly. Hitler it was the Blitzkrieg. And Hitler unleashed absolutely what they were not expecting. You know, during the Phony War, as they called it, from 1939 up until April of 1940, they were waiting for Hitler to make his move because in September of 1939, England had declared war. And that is when Hitler, master tactician that he was, chose to do nothing. And then he came down like a storm and just began to topple the European nations like dominoes. And Britain was there, represented by the British Expeditionary Force. And they were completely taken by surprise, and they fought valiantly, but they were pushed back and pushed back and pushed back until finally Hitler's army cut through France like butter and surrounded and cut off the men. And so at Dunkirk, which is on the northern shore of France, they were literally cut off and surrounded.
And this is the entire army. This isn't just a few units.
That's exactly right. It was the entire army, and all told, the French, there were French allies there as well. There were 360,000 men who were literally sitting ducks, because at the time that the Admiralty realized the gravity of the situation, they had dispatched battleships to Dunkirk. The problem was, for 1 mile out from the shore, the shelving was not deep enough to allow battleships in. Only at the mole in the harbor of Dunkirk could a battleship get in, one at a time. And it was like taking a spoonful of men from a great huge vat, and the whole time they were being shelled and they were being bombed. And the English Channel was mined. So the miracle of Dunkirk is that the British nation came together to pray, and that deliverance came. And the English Channel they want to say it was the calmest that it was in 100 years.
That's amazing.
You bet.
Yeah, that's the other miracle. God answered that prayer. Wow. Well, in Maggie Bright, your characters seem to be mostly unbelievers, not Christians in the biblical sense. Although the main female character, Claire, seemed to develop the beginnings of faith in this story. So overall, I didn't see a real strong influence of Christian faith in Maggie Bright. And I know today Britain is pretty much a post-Christian nation. But what did your research show about the influence of the Christian faith in the lives of the British people in 1940? Was their faith more in the living God, or was it more in the indomitable British spirit? What did you find in your research?
That's a good question. I think there was both of that, because the British spirit was indomitable, but I believe that was buoyed by prayer, because it took that British spirit to, in fact, they talked about the British spirit. That was the big thing, especially back then.
Yeah.
And especially post Dunkirk, it was the Dunkirk spirit. Because the British people went through so much. They went through more than our nation, which was so far away from the ravages of war. We were isolated from it. So they went through a great deal, but the prayer, especially at that time, that made a huge impact. But Churchill, he said that he himself was not a particularly religious man, but it was fascinating to hear what he had to say about the spiritual tone at that time, especially on May 26, 1940, when he went to Westminster Abbey with the king and with so many statesmen. Queen Wilhelmina was there. She was in exile from the Netherlands.
Yes.
So she was there to pray. And Churchill made this amazing comment. He said that on that day there seemed to be a white glow throughout our island. And I believe it was because of prayer. And Milton, who plays a part in this, my Captain Milton, he's also quoting from Milton and quoting from Paradise Lost. And I deliberately pull bits of Paradise Lost into the novel to show that second story of what's going on up here in the heavenlies. And there was far more going on up here in the heavenlies as God launched a rescue for these men via the prayers of God's people. And I don't know, are you familiar with Rees Howells? He was called God's intercessor back then. He was a Welsh coal miner. And he interceded for days for this. And God called upon his intercessors at that time, as well as your average English person who wasn't particularly religious at all. On that day, May 26, 1940, the churches were packed. And that was the result of doing their best for God, King, country.
So do you think that their faith grew more during the war? Because there were still, 5 years left?
I think so, because they witnessed the miracle of, what we just talked about, the British spirit, which held men to tasks that others would have just given up, because some men went without sleep for days.
I know.
Under harrowing circumstances.
You described that so well too. And I thought, how are they making it?
I drew upon as many sources I could at that time, because I really wanted the reality of what the men were involved in. What was it like? I wanted it to be like a Spielberg movie where you're there and you have the bombs going off. And in Saving Private Ryan, that first push when they're storming Normandy Beach, that's what these men were living 5 years earlier in 1940, when they were being bombed, and all these things were going on. And C.S. Lewis, so many Christians of the day were making comments on what was going on. George Orwell made a comment. He said he would rather have the British army cut to pieces than capitulate to Hitler. And that kind of showed some of them really didn't believe they would be rescued. Because the news coming from the continent was so bad. They were cut off and surrounded. Many really didn't think that they had a chance.
They probably didn't, except for that miracle.
Absolutely. Churchill himself called it a miracle of deliverance.
The British people sacrificed and suffered an awful lot during World War II. Do you think if the American people were called to do the same today, that we would be able to rise to the challenge, or what would it take for us to do that?
I believe that we could rise to the challenge. I believe it because the same stuff that is in us and the same God that they called upon, that's the God that we call upon.
Mm-hmm.
And, I almost compare the state of America now to kind of how it was back then for England.
Which makes your book very timely.
Yeah, and I keep, every time I turn around, I hear about the call to prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And that really became a theme of the book, particularly through Mrs. Shrewsbury. She, I call her by her nickname. She has this statement toward the end of the book, and not many people know, not many readers really know that when she says at the end of the book, she's talking to the enemy, where she says, then she jabbed her finger to the south and said severely, you shatterer, you shall not prevail, not when people pray. She wasn't talking to Hitler. She was talking to the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I believe with all my heart, that the same as she said, she was shouting toward America, and she said, wake up, thou that sleepest, wake and pray. Every time I turn around, that's the message I'm hearing for America for today is, wake up and pray.
Yeah.
Wake up and pray.
Yeah, I caught that.
Good.
Yeah, that was
Good.
That was good. Your characters showed a compassionate concern for handicapped children. That was also done really well, especially for the children that went through those Nazi atrocities.
Mm-hmm.
And you described the reactions and the feelings of your characters so well. I wondered, have you had any personal experience that helped you to do that?
My personal experience was the fact that I went to the British War Museum and saw an exhibit that I was not expecting. Mm-hmm. The day that I went to the British War Museum, I thought I was going to be able to go to the Dunkirk exhibit. It just so happened it was closed on that day. So I was so disappointed, and I'm walking around the museum, and then they had this different exhibit, which was all about the T4 program that Hitler had set up that was going on already in the 1930s, and that was his euthanasia program for mentally handicapped children, physically deformed children, children with Down syndrome were being euthanized, or first they were being sterilized, then they were being euthanized. What shattered me was the very picture that Claire looked at. Her reaction was my reaction. Mm-hmm. When I saw, I describe in the book, I describe a child who is naked with a black background so that it could show his deformity clearer. And you could look at his face and you could see the lucidity of his face. The child was all there. And then his deformity was, his hips were deformed and one leg curved. Mm-hmm. And the shock of realizing that child was murdered by Hitler, not by Hitler, but by people who believed in Hitler and threw in with Hitler's plan and executed his program, his T4 program of euthanasia, that this very child that I looked at was killed. It provoked a reaction in me. It was so unexpected. And they were doing that in the 1930s.
Yeah.
And, for us, the war started in, 1941? After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, that's when it really started for us. Mm-hmm. The persecution of Jews, when you study the Holocaust, that started in the early 30s.
Wow.
And so this program was going on in the 30s. Mm-hmm. And so that was what I experienced. I wanted my reaction to be Claire's reaction, my character's reaction.
Mm-hmm. Almost 58 million babies have been killed in the United States through abortion. And a lot of times it's because the child might not be perfect, might have Down syndrome, or might be a girl or a boy if they didn't want that, or something like that. What do you think it will take for America to wake up and see that we're becoming more and more like the Nazis were?
That's a great correlation because that was in the back of my mind.
Really?
You know, I connected abortion to the T4 program.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a program of getting rid of undesirables.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, you know, that was, I saw it and I felt it as I was writing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's frightening. The America that I knew and that I grew up in is no more.
No.
But God is here. It will probably take the kind of persecution that I think many Christians see is coming to America now. But that is where the Holy Spirit is going to be rising up in Christians to love people all the more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that love will make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
God is going to be changing Christians throughout this whole thing that's coming, and it's going to be the realization once more of, I am a sinner, saved by grace. God is in the world, reconciling the world to himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in America. He is still reconciling America to himself.
Right. Yeah. And we just need to turn back to him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Through prayer. Awake, thou that sleepest.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now back to your character, Milton.
Okay.
He was my favorite character in the book. I really liked Milton. The relationship that he had with the men, I thought was just brilliant, the way you portrayed that. You showed, again, concern and respect for the handicapped through that. And also through the men's reactions to him, the kind of reactions that, you know, a handicapped person might get. You know, the whole gamut. You showed it all. And I thought that was really good. But,
Thank you.
what passion drove you to write that particular character?
I was reading Paradise Lost at the time that I was writing Maggie Bright. I had no intention of having a guy named Milton show up in my book. Mm-hmm. And even from the first page, I had no intention he would open the story. It was one of those things that just came together, and I don't know how it worked. It just did. And as I was reading, actually, kind of here's what happened. As I was reading Paradise Lost, you know, it's one of those books that you put on your shelf and you say, oh, I'm going to get to that someday because all of these book clubs say I should read Paradise Lost, which you don't do, you know, because it's like this thick and it's complicated and it's Shakespearean in tone. Mm-hmm. And if you've read, you know, when you read Shakespeare, it takes some time to get into the cadence of the language. Mm-hmm. And that was the same with Paradise Lost. Well, as I'm reading Paradise Lost, I'm thinking, so that's where we got that expression from, you know, so that's where it was just amazing.
Yeah. And
I loved the story. It was absolutely, why did I read this, you know, when I was a kid? So I'm taking notes, right? And I'm jotting down things that just struck me as I'm reading Paradise Lost. Somewhere along the line, the light went on. Mm-hmm. And I just began to see some parallels. But I would be lying if I told you that I did it on purpose. I so didn't. And it's just one of those amazing things that just comes together and works. And you don't know how it came together, but it just worked.
I thought it was one of the powerful parts of your book.
Thank you. It's one of my favorite parts.
Yeah.
It was one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, that was really neat. I mean, I loved the development of the relationship between him and the main character. I can't remember the main character.
Was it Jamie?
Jamie
was the soldier.
Yeah,
There's a lot of characters.
That was assigned with taking him to Dunkirk. That's
yes.
what I'm talking about.
Yes.
The way that relationship developed. I loved it. And I loved the way you were able to show the exhausted, totally spent state of the men who were in Dunkirk and those who came to rescue them, especially Murray and William. Mm-hmm. Have you ever experienced going way beyond what you thought you were capable of, physically, emotionally, and spiritually like that?
I sure have. And
is that what you wrote from?
Yes. Yes. And you know, they say you have to write what you know.
Right.
And I had been in that circumstance before where I would say, God, I got nothing. I got nothing. Mm-hmm. In fact, I was in a circumstance once where I was in the hospital, had an infection, an abdominal infection, came out of nowhere.
Wow.
So I was in the hospital for a week, and I was just ready to leave. It was a few days toward the end of the stay, but I was still very sick. And I've just found out that I was going to have a roommate. I hadn't had a roommate all week. I did not want a roommate now. And all of a sudden I felt the Lord say, when she comes in, I want you to smile. I want you to give her a smile. And I said, I can't do that. I'm exhausted. I've had it. I'm angry that she's coming in and realizing that she's going to get the bed next to me, which has the view. And all this time I was so sick I didn't realize I had a view. And all of a sudden I realized she's going to get it. And the Lord said, well, I want her to have the view, and more than that, I want you to smile when she comes in. And I said, Lord, I don't have it in me to smile. But you do. You do. So Father, help me to smile. If you want me to do this, you're going to have to pull it off. So I heard her coming down. I was like, okay, you got 10 seconds, Lord. I still don't have a smile in me. The minute she came in, I smiled at her. And that is significant because like a day later, and she was in a terrible state. And I didn't know, I found out later she was a Christian. Mm-hmm. And the Lord went before her to prepare the way by having her roommate smile as she's coming in. So a few days later, she was on the phone. I happened to overhear it. She's right next to me, right? And she said to her friend, well, I just have to tell you, I have the most wonderful roommate. I came in, she gave me the most beautiful smile, and I felt so welcomed. I thought, honey, you have no idea. I had to pray and ask for that smile. I had no smile in me. So yes, absolutely. I believe that we can be called to do even the teeny little things that just feel so impossible to us, and we think we don't have anything more left to give. Mm-hmm. But the word is either true or it's not when it says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, not through Tracy who gives me strength.
Right.
And we have reserves that we just don't know about, mm-hmm. and it's because that reserve is Christ.
That's right. Great. Good answer. Well, I'm a firm believer in the power of story to change lives, and that's why I wanted to have you on. And although your story although your story isn't blatantly Christian, it has the Christian undertones, and it certainly has a lot of the Christian principles in it. What effect do you hope your story will have on your readers?
I was hoping I gave the novel when it was in manuscript form to a dear friend of mine who is great at giving me critique. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to tell her what kind of takeaway I wanted her to have, mm-hmm. but I wanted desperately for her to come back and tell me what she took away from it. Because there was one thing that I wanted her to get out of it. But uncharacteristically, I shut my mouth and I was like, okay, just read the book, tell me what you think. So she read the book and she said, Trace, when I closed the book, she said, all I wanted to do, I wanted to get down on my knees and pray because I see what it does. I saw what it did in that book because it's a book that's based on historical facts. Mm-hmm. It's based on the fact of people, of a nation coming together to pray. And the facts that happened after that were unnatural, that had to be supernatural. Mm-hmm. And that's the number one thing. If people read the book and they feel like they just want to pray, then my job's done.
All right. So it's a call in disguise. It's kind of a call to prayer.
Absolutely.
Because it is a true story based on a miraculous answer to prayer.
You bet it is.
Yeah. And it's a really good read. So.
Oh, thank you.
And where can people find you online?
At tracygroot.com. Tracy Groot.
Groot.
Well, it's a Dutch name, so my husband says Groot. Everybody else says Groot. It's phonetically written. So tracygroot.com.
Okay.
Wherever Christian books are sold.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank you very much, Jeanne.
Share